Hello, everyone. My name is Sue King, and I am the 9th District PTA parliamentarian. My very first job, elected job in PTA, was as an elementary school secretary, and that was a really long time ago. But I have to tell you honestly, between parliamentarian and secretary, this is my favorite role. It requires me to pay attention during the meeting. So that said, we're going to move through this. I don't think we'll be an hour and a half. We originally booked for 2 hours, and that seemed way too long for the secretary workshop. So we cut it back to an hour and a half. If it takes that long, I'm good with that, but we may well finish early, which will be a gift to all of you. It's my pleasure to introduce to you Beth Bakhtin, who is our 9th District PTA Vice President for Leadership Services, and she is going to give you some operating instructions.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Folks will be joining us randomly through the evening as their schedule permits. So we have disabled the chat in an effort to provide you with correct information. Sometimes the questions get lost in the chat. So if you have a question during the evening, please enter it in the chat and it will come to Sue and I. And that way I can scoop them up and make sure that Sue gets the opportunity to answer your questions live. So that will help us a great deal. So if you have questions, you can enter them in the chat, or when there is time for questions, Sue has allotted several places in the presentation. If you will raise your electronic hand and then ask your question, that would help a great deal. That's it for me.
Thank you, Beth. And here we go. So ordinarily, I ask who needs Spanish translation. I do not speak Spanish, but there is Spanish on each and every one of the slides. Additionally, I believe you have the slide presentation. You are welcome to use that in your PTAs if you need to share the role of the secretary with your PTA board. Uh-oh. Oh, here we are. Sorry. There we are. So the responsibilities for all PTA secretaries include attending training. Hooray, you have chosen to participate with us tonight. One of the things that you will want to do is, if you have not already done it, because we're a few months into the term, is gather up all of the minutes from the previous secretary. And when I say all, that could be a lot. Minutes are to be saved forever. They are part of the permanent record. So you'll need to find all of those minutes. They should be in either glued into, rubber cemented into a bound book, or printed from one's computer and bound up. And then the trick is, especially if you have a PTA that's, with all due respect, old, you will want to find a place to store those. I have a tragic story of minutes being stored in someone's garage that caught on fire, and the minutes for that organization were burned to the ground. So they had to try their very best to reconstruct, but life happens, and they were able to move forward, doing the best they could to gather those materials. For the purposes of the secretary and storing of minutes, you'll want to keep your minutes. You will want to record your minutes in the most concise way possible. And in the packet of information that was sent to you, or the handouts that were sent to you, there is a sample of 9th District minutes. Our meetings are about an hour and a half long, and the secretaries work really hard at getting those minutes to 2 pages. So it's one piece of paper on both sides if we were printing, and then 2 pages bound into the book at the end of the term or as the term moves forward. If you choose not to use a bound book, and when I say that, I'm talking about a hardbound book, you can also print up all of the minutes from your term, your secretary term, take them to a copy shop or perhaps your school district shop and have them bound. Electronic storage is also permitted, but you have to be careful with that to make sure that you have a backup or a redundancy, so that if your electronic storage fails, you have not lost the records. This is a blatant, an unapologetic commercial for the California State PTA meeting minute book. These are available online at shoppta. I can't see if it's .com, where you can purchase this book for $11.50. It provides plenty of room to record the minutes. You could use just scratch paper to take your minutes, or a Big Chief tablet, whatever sort of mechanism you're going to use, and then transfer that information, either typed, printed, and glued into this book, or if you have lovely handwriting, you could handwrite it right into this book. What you want to make sure, though, whatever your handwriting looks like, is the document that you end with is legible. There's no point in saving minutes that are not legible, so find a way to do that. You are not required to use this particular book. I'm just showing it to you in case. There. So the responsibilities of the PTA secretary include the following, and I've got a couple of slides that speak of these responsibilities. Sending out the meeting notices. That's very different now than it was when I began as a secretary. When I began as a secretary, we sent postcards to notify all of our members, giving the notice 10 days ahead as required. We mailed those, and they were received by our board members to show up at meetings. For association meetings, it was generally a flyer that the principal approved to be sent home with kids. Well, we have moved into the modern era. So now there are just a whole lot of ways to notify members of the executive board of those meetings, or members of your association of association meetings. And I always advise that you use as many methods as your community needs in order to be notified for meetings, because it becomes a deal when someone doesn't get the notice of a meeting. Additionally, and we'll go into some more of that later. Additionally, the secretary is charged with reading any correspondence, which goes from thank you notes clear down to official business that's received by the PTA. If there is a resignation on your board, you'll want to try and get that letter of resignation so that it can be read into the record on behalf of that member who is needing to resign. Also, the secretary is responsible for writing letters when authorized. So the PTA may want to send a letter to an elected official that says, we need a crossing guard at the end of our school because it's dangerous, whatever. And so once the membership has authorized that letter to go to whichever elected official it would be, then the secretary writes it. Most of the time, the president signs it. So as secretary, you become the ghost writer for the president. Most all correspondence goes out with the president's signature at the bottom. Sometimes two officers will sign letters, but for sure you want the president to be signing letters. And then, of course, the secretary is responsible for keeping those letters received. And as the secretary, you get to decide how you want to keep that information, whether it's in a 3-ring binder from the olden days, scanned and saved into your electronic document, but you'll still have that paper. If you do indeed receive a paper letter, you'll need to figure out what's going to work best for you to send those notices. One of the things that I want to go back to is the meeting notices, and the most important notice that gets sent to membership in an entire year is the notice for the annual meeting, the annual election meeting. This notice requires 30 days. Work with the president and the parliamentarian to notify members of this meeting, including the date, the time, the place, along with the agenda items that will be considered. In the election meeting, that's the report of the nominating committee. Not just that we're going to have an election, but we're going to have an election, and these are the people and the offices for which we will conduct this election. So it's the list of nominees, their names, positions. And every other meeting, every other association meeting and board meetings require 10 days notice. Check in your bylaws to see the notice for special meetings. I believe it's 7 days, but I don't have that right in front of me. One of the important things about this 30-day notice, if a meeting is not given 30-day notice, this election meeting, then any business that is considered at that meeting is null and void, and you have to have a do-over. Well, nobody really wants a do-over. So make sure you count backwards on your calendar to make sure that you are giving the required notice. Additional action that is to be included in the minutes is the actions of the executive board, not the conversation, not the discussion, but the action. Action always starts with a motion. So it would be Sue King moved, Beth Bactine moved, whichever officer or member of the board has made the motion, their name is included and the action that they wish to have happen. You also want to have the record the actions of the association. Any business that comes to the executive board then goes to the association. The membership has the final say on whether or not the PTA is going to engage in an activity. So an easy example of this is a fundraising project. Hopefully you have a fundraising committee that decides which programs and projects the PTA is going to present in order to raise the funds to do the programs and projects that the PTA wishes to present. The executive board gets a motion from the bylaws committee that the bylaws committee is proposing the following fundraiser, could be one, or it could be a year's worth, subject to change, of course, because we never know what's going to happen and we might need to pivot away from one particular project and into another. After the association has approved that project, assuming they do, that very same motion then goes to the association to be considered again. Once it's approved by the association, then the executive board and the Ways and Means Committee can put their plan into place. So I'm thinking that you're probably figuring out that we don't do things in a week. Everything is going to take a bit longer than it may have been taking. Make sure that as a secretary, you send the draft minutes right away to the president. And as soon as the president says, these look good to me, send them to the rest of the executive board. In many cases, board members use those minutes as a to-do list. I know I do. What did I agree to do at that meeting? What did you agree to do at that meeting, if indeed those things happened? So know that the minutes need to get out to the group as quickly as possible. And when I say the group, I mean the executive board. They can go to the association for an association meeting, for regular association meetings with the 10-day notice. They can go to executive board meetings, or excuse me, they can go for the annual election meeting along with that notice 30 days in advance. So in addition to the minutes, you'll want to work with the president to make sure that all of the action that came from the executive board gets to the association. Do you have any questions so far? Beth is going to be able to see your electronic hands if you have a question so far on what we've covered.
So I have one question so far, and it's regarding the minutes. Let me get to it. Does an electronic copy of the minutes take the place of a bound book?
As long as they are stored securely. I don't know that it takes the place of, but it certainly can be used. And this is new to PTA, so we're still kind of muddling our way through electronic storage. You've probably, if you've been in PTA for a while, you probably know that forever and ever it was the bound book, and we had paper copies and we distributed paper copies. Electronic copies and electronic storage is permitted as long as you have something in place so that if your electronic storage fails, your minutes are not lost.
see, I believe there's one more. Let me get to it. Can the president, vice president take over the duty of reading mail received?
Yes. And then the
And
things that would then need to be shared with the board or with the association can be given to the secretary or can be given to another. I mean, that the answer is yes, the duty can be reassigned.
And another really good question, if the PTA president has a monthly meeting with the principal, does the secretary need to record those meetings as well?
No. I might take notes. The principal told me that, yeah, you can't use the school for meetings. I would want that to be in my personal notes to take. And I'm sorry, that was a kind of negative thing. If the principal says, yes, you can have a carnival, then you'll want to make sure you have some note of that so that a suggestion might be when the president meets with the principal, take another board member with you. And just
Another,
say, we're training.
I'm sorry. If the secretary receives mail from the bank, does this need to be recorded in the minutes?
Might depend on what the bank letter says. If it's just the bank statement, probably not. If it's something more than that, yeah, I'd be sharing that right away. And with the financial officers as well.
Let's see, I think we're caught up.
Okay, now this is a thumbnail of secretary responsibilities. If you will look at the California State PTA toolkit, and in the information that has been distributed, there is a for real job description that's like a page and a half of detail on these duties. All right, moving along. Here are the things that you need to bring as a secretary for in-person meetings. These are the in-person things to bring. A copy of the bylaws. The secretary is the official holder of the signed by the state parliamentarian, signed by the unit president and the secretary. You are the custodian of those bylaws. If you need a copy, contact our office at 9thdistrictpta.org and we can get you a copy of your bylaws. But do a little bit of homework and look for that official signed by those three officers whenever it happened, signed by those three officers. Make sure you bring minutes of the past meetings. Now, you don't need all of them. You may only need this term, these few months that we have actually been in session, and maybe a month or two before that. So look for those minutes. And the reason that we're doing that is in case somebody said, what did we decide last month? What did we decide in August that we wanted to do? That way you have the record and you can move forward with that. Make sure you bring a red pen or a red pencil for corrections. It's your opportunity to be a teacher pro tem. And as we get toward the end of this presentation, I'll show you how those corrections are made. Also, the secretary is responsible for keeping the official membership list. Work with the membership chairman or membership vice president to have that list with you and advise the membership person, whether it's a vice president or a chairman, that not only do we need to keep the name of the member, individual names, we need the date on which they joined. So if you're using Totem, you probably already have that. If you're collecting membership monies at your events, that's fine and dandy. You want to make sure you know when they joined. And the reason that's important is you must be a member for 30 days to participate in meetings. And by participate, I mean make motions, ask questions, debate, and vote. One is a member immediately upon paying the dues, but you don't have voting rights for 30 days. So make sure name and date they joined. The secretary should also bring paper for ballots in case you have something that is controversial, in case you're having an election where more than one person is running for an office. Those things require a ballot. Ballots can be as simple as note cards that are distributed in accordance with the membership list. If you don't keep a membership list, every adult in the room gets to vote whether they are a member or not, which destroys the advantage of being a member. It's one of the perks of being a member that you can't actually touch. I know many PTAs have other goodies and incentives for joining, but the ability to vote is the most important one. So you'll want to figure out how you want, as the secretary, how you want to make sure everybody gets to vote. You can take scratch paper. If you keep a box like I do on the side of your desk that collects the to be recycled paper, you can take a bunch of that, cut it up, and use the blank side of it for ballots. Ask for the agenda in advance. It's your right as a secretary to have it in advance. And then you can use that agenda, that print agenda or electronic agenda, to frame your minutes, because the minutes are going to follow the agenda in the order that things happened. And if there are, if you know in advance what's going to happen, then you can just put in the action. When you get home, you can do a save as and clean those up before the next meeting. When I'm the secretary, I also ask for motions to be written. I prefer they come in advance. That way I can have them in my minutes already. But if I don't get them in advance because stuff happens during a meeting and sometimes motions come out of the blue, you still want to have it in writing so that there is no question about what is in your minutes. What I have for you here is a sample motion blank. It can be this simple, and you can provide this without the lines. Of course, this is for a paper meeting where someone is writing on paper, with the name of the PTA, what you want to do. I move Sunshine PTA host a picnic on the school grounds. My name and the date that I made that motion. You can develop your own form using this format or anything else that will work for you. Some PTAs that have a lot of money print these up on NCR paper, no carbon required paper, and they give a copy to the president. They give a copy to the secretary, and then the motion maker also has a copy of it. If money is involved in this motion, you may want to have the maker of the motion may want to have the budget line, whether that's a name or a number, so that if we're spending money, we know where that money is coming from. If it's for officer supplies, it's right there. And then the treasurer will know which account for bookkeeping purposes to take that money from. If it's a hospitality item, then the money comes from the hospitality budget. Develop your own method for how you're going to keep these motion blanks, and I suggest that you keep them for a year. I have a coupon booklet where I put mine in by meeting, so that when somebody says, this is not what I said, the fact that you changed your mind does not necessarily mean I did it incorrectly. So when someone tells me that that's not what they said, or not what their intention was, I can take that motion blank out. It's in their handwriting, and I have really thick skin and broad shoulders, and I will say, did I get it wrong? I know I didn't, because I typed exactly what they wrote. But if they've decided that, that isn't what I said, then you can show that to them and say, how did I get it wrong? How can we fix it? So if they need a new motion to fix what they did, that's possible as well. It's another workshop. So know that you want to keep those on hand. Maybe you just need to bring those to one meeting, depending on what method you choose to save those in. Okay, here are the things that need to be included in the minutes. And I'm obviously concentrating on the left-hand side of the screen, no hablo español, but it's there if someone needs it. You want to make sure that you have the name of the association, Sunshine PTA, The kind of meeting, it's either an executive board meeting or an association meeting, might be a special meeting. It could be a committee meeting. You want the date, the time that the meeting was called to order, and the place. You also want to include the name and title of the presiding officer. Beth Bactine, Vice President, called the meeting to order in the absence of the president. It's that simple. You will also want to have an attendance list, those in attendance, or attach the sign-in sheet. And you can do that with paper or electronically, whichever way you're going to store your minutes. The reason that you want the attendance list is twofold. One, you want to, if anybody questions, you want to be able to show that you had a quorum present. When this meeting was called to order, we had a quorum present. On the other hand, you also want to make sure if you're having a problem with a board member and attending, they're not calling in to tell the president they're going to be absent. It's inexcused or it's an unexcused absence. And that is one of the ways, one of the mechanisms, I think is a better word, where an officer can be removed from office. You can find that whole process in your bylaws, Article 6, duties of officers and chairpersons. But when an officer or chairman fails to attend 3 consecutive meetings without adequate excuse, and then it goes on and gives some other information. So if you aren't listing those who are present, those who are absent and unexcused, then you have no background for removing someone who's not attending, not doing their work, whatever the case may be. You also want to make sure that you note in the minutes of this meeting the disposition of the minutes of the previous meeting. So the minutes were either approved as presented, approved as corrected, and you want to note the corrections. And again, we're going to talk about correcting minutes in a slide or two. Sometimes the information that's in number 1, number 2, and number 3, although they're not answered, I guess not number 3, at least in number 1, all of that could be in the header of your piece of paper. So if you put a header of Sunshine PTA, executive board meeting, and the date, time, and place, then you don't need to repeat that in the body of the minutes. So you can do it one of 2 ways, either in the body of the minutes or in the header of those same minutes. You want to have a statement of accounts and a list of bills to be approved for payment. That's really oddly worded. I need to reword that. But what we're talking about here is the treasurer's report. You want to make sure that you have at a bare minimum in the minutes, the balance on hand, the receipts for the period, which is probably month to month, the disbursements for the same period, and the ending balance. Now, if you have monthly association meetings, this will fall in the same categories, the same order as executive board minutes. But at both of those minutes or both of those meetings, there should be a treasurer's report showing those numbers. If the treasurer has a very lengthy report with budget to actual and all of the disbursements, you can attach those reports to the minutes as well, either paper or electronically. But in the body of the minutes, you want to make sure that you have that balance on hand, receipts, disbursements, and the ending balance for the period. Another thing to include is a summary of reports. We don't need to have the blow-by-blow of every report. First of all, it's going to make for a very long meeting. Even if you have 7 members on your executive board, if each of them gives a 15 or 20-minute report, we're going to be there all day, all night, and folk will stop coming. I'm not coming to meetings that go that long. On the other hand, if you provide me with a printed report or an electronic report, I will read it and I will know what's going on in that department. So, and reports can be attached, just like every other report that we have spoken of can be attached so that there is a permanent record of that report for that officer. When you're taking your minutes, you want to make sure that you have the name of the motion maker. So Sue King moved. Your minutes will read Sue King moved, whatever I moved. You do not need, I repeat, do not need the name of the member who makes the second. It is not required, it's not necessary. If there's no second, the next sentence will read, the motion failed for lack of a second. But if someone makes the second, the disposition of the motion indicates that there was a second. It's sort of a foregone conclusion because we moved forward, that it had a second. You don't need to note that. And lastly, you want to include the results of any election. So I spoke previously about the meeting notice that's going to include the list of those nominated for office. And then you want to make sure that you list those elected, the position and the name and the position. It doesn't really matter which way it goes in your minutes, but you want to have both. If you have a balloted election, the minutes will include the number of votes received by each candidate if there's more than one candidate for office. If there's only one candidate, then it can be a motion by acclamation to acclaim those people elected. That's another workshop. Again, I don't want to fall down my parliamentarian rabbit hole for minutes, but you want the result of the election. If we vote by ballot on other issues, any other motion where a ballot has been requested, you'll want to note the motion and the disposition with the number of votes that voted in the affirmative, the number of members that voted in the affirmative, and the number of members that voted in the negative, so that we know the motion either was adopted by the group or the motion failed. You'll want to make sure that you have program notes. These are very brief program notes. Principal Green presented the busing report from the school district of, what do you call them? Campus security reported whatever the campus security wants to report. It, again, does not have to be a word by word transcription of what was presented to either the executive board or the association. In fact, most of us want to have association meetings that go by very quickly so that we can get on to the real business, which is usually going to the classroom to visit, meeting with the teacher, a special program from the principal or the school district, those sorts of things. So we sometimes attach our PTA meetings to other things that are happening at school, and why we would never lie and say, come to this, it'll be fun, because it may be preceded by a PTA meeting, and not everybody finds those to be fun. At any rate, you want to let folk know that there will be a brief PTA meeting preceding the back to school night, preceding open house, whatever the case may be. You want to note the time that the meeting adjourned. We sometimes forget this, which means the meeting is still going on. So make sure that you have the time of adjournment. And then it's the secretary's signature and the date that those minutes are approved. So if we are now having our end of September meeting, we will probably have these approved, if it's an executive board meeting, toward the end of October, or maybe the end of November if it's an association meeting. So the date is when those minutes were approved. And here's how we correct those errors. And I was absolutely unable to make this little program work so that you could see it, what would be real time. So only my daddy calls me Susie. I'm always Sue. So the minutes were either distributed or read, and I found my incorrect name. So I went to the next meeting and said, my name is Sue. The secretary circles the whatever is incorrect, and in the margin puts the correction and the date that the correction was made. So I corrected it at a meeting that was convened on July 7th, 2022. That's the correction. In the minutes of the August meeting, the secretary is going to report that the minutes were approved as corrected. The correction is striking Sue or striking Susie and inserting Sue. It just has to be that short and that simple. Keeping in mind that if your members change their mind between one meeting and the next, your minutes are not in error. So if they have changed their mind, there are ways to correct what they've done, but your minutes are still correct with what happened at the first. I told you this wouldn't be an hour. So between meetings, there are responsibilities for the secretary that have nothing to do with taking minutes. The secretary should prepare the minutes promptly. And then you share with the president. The president may say, please send these out to the rest of the board or have them ready to send out on day 10 prior to, or day 30 prior to, depending on which meeting you're having. The secretary is also responsible for signing authorizations for payment. The secretary is the officer who knows the motion to pay those bills was adopted at whichever meeting it was. So you can check back with your minutes, or maybe you can remember which authorizations or which payments were approved, and you know on this authorization it's been approved. You can sign off and hand it back to the treasurer, so the treasurer keeps those. If the secretary will call the meeting to order in the absence of the president or the vice president, any of the vice presidents are absent. This doesn't mean that the secretary chairs the meeting and also frantically takes minutes while chairing the meeting. You call the meeting to order and you chair it until someone is drafted, appointed, volunteers to be the president for that meeting. We had a meeting the other day. The president was at home sick. The vice president was stuck in traffic. And so the next vice president called the meeting to order, chaired the meeting until the first vice president arrived and was able to then chair the rest of the meeting, while the secretary was then taking the minutes to proceed and cover that particular meeting. As soon as there we are. So here we are at the end of the term, and this is probably one of the most important slides after between meetings. What you want to do is, as an executive board, as the secretary, you can recommend to the executive board how we're going to store these minutes, whether we're going to store them electronically, but we're also going to have a backup in print and where that backup in print copy is going to be stored. So as a board, you can determine those things. So you're either going to have your electronic storage or your bound book, or maybe you're going to have both, because that's the redundancy that will work best for your PTA. Additionally, the secretary is required to give the auditor a copy of all approved and dated minutes for the audit. The auditor is required, if you've ever been an auditor, you've seen the checklist. It's like 8-point type on an 8.5 by 11 page. And it's top to bottom, margin to margin, with things the auditor needs to collect in order to have an accurate audit. And that includes the minutes from association meetings, the minutes from board meetings, the minutes from committee meetings, so that the auditor knows that every expenditure has been approved. Every expenditure has to be approved all along the way. There we are. That was quick. Questions? Preguntas?
Yes, we have a few.
Okay, I'm ready.
We get to my page. Does a motion blank replace writing motions in the minutes?
No. The motions need to be transcribed into the minutes.
Is a motion required to approve the minutes?
Not really. If the president says the minutes are approved as presented, the minutes are approved as corrected, that is a general consent motion. It's not wrong to have a motion to do it, but you don't have to.
So here's a little background and then a question. We've been cautioned by a previous PTA president to keep our minutes brief because some lawyers like to sue PTAs.
True
It
fact.
appears that your recommendations would fit that need. Can you share any experience of PTAs that have been sued based on minutes? Is that a real concern?
I have not had the pleasure of that experience. We, as you all know, we live in a very litigious society, and folk will sue at the drop of a hat, is what I will say. So keeping your minutes brief and absolutely impersonal will protect not only the association, but it will protect you. So you don't want to say Sue King is the worst treasurer ever. It might be absolutely true. In fact, I'll fess up. It will be absolutely true, because in all my years in PTA, I've never been a financial officer, but that information is for me to share with the world, not for the PTA board to be having a conversation behind my back that, oh my gosh, don't let her do it. First of all, I'm gonna tell you, don't do it. But I have never had that pleasure, again, as I said, but it wouldn't surprise me that somewhere somebody didn't bring a suit against the PTA. And you all know, we have director and officer insurance coverage, right? Part of the insurance package that your PTA buys every year, there is a director officer component that will my one experience with going to court for PTA was not something that was in the minutes, but it was a small claims case. The PTA insurance broker connected those PTA officers with an attorney over the telephone. And even the day that we were in court, the lawyer was calling the president with do this, do that, do this, do that. The case was dismissed in PTA's favor. So yay. But know that that insurance is available if you get into a situation like that. So pay your premium as soon as you can, and read the booklet that comes that tells you the details of your policy.
In the time of online meetings and electronic documents, do any changes in electronic minutes also need to be recorded with tracked changes?
Read it again. We're having Zoom meeting or some kind of electronic meeting, and we're
in the
recording
time-
our minutes.
Yes, in the time of online meetings and electronic documents, do any changes to the minutes also need to be recorded and tracked? So if they're keeping their minutes electronically in
Mhm.
whatever modality, and they're making changes as requested by the body, should those changes be tracked?
Probably, but I would suggest not in track changes. So here's how I feel about minutes. They are a draft document until they're presented at the meeting, in person or electronic, whichever kind of meeting you're having, until they're presented at the meeting for adoption. So you could send a draft document to your president, to your board. You could have track changes in that so that you have all of your changes in one place, not a terrible idea. And then have what you present at the meeting, if it's your presenting paper or you're showing an electronic document, using whatever you're using. What you want to show is the cleanest copy possible until members at the meeting make changes or additional changes as the case may be. Does that make sense?
Does to me.
Okay.
Um,
If it doesn't, raise your hand and we'll do it again.
Yeah, please raise your hand, you guys, so that we can make sure that you have what you need from that question. And an additional question, do we need to list check numbers with their amounts or just the numbers of ratified checks?
In the treasurer's report, is that where we are? And keep in mind,
believe
I've
so.
been a treasurer. So
Yes.
Beth, you've been a treasurer. What would you say?
I have. So our process is when you ratify your bills, you should have a presentation of your bills. You should note what the bill, who the bill is to, the dollar amount that the bill is being paid. And once the ratification comes, we just need the check numbers and the total dollar amount. But you should be giving your either association or your executive board a full accounting of the treasury, and that includes a check register. Now, those don't have to be in the body of the minutes, but that could be attached to the minutes with a simple statement.
See attached.
See attached, and then make arrangements for either pasting them into the book, if you have a hard copy book or a soft bound book, or keeping them electronically in one file with the approved minutes. So I hope that answers that. Let me double check and see any more questions. I think we got everyone. If I missed your question, please unmute and chime in.
Okay, so here is contact information for me, parliamentarian@9thdistrictpta.org. Oops. Or through our office, if you have a question for another officer. We all have email addresses that look just like this with the office. So president at, treasurer at, secretary at 9thdistrictpta.org. Office at 9thdistrictpta.org will get you to Joanne Butler, who is our office administrator. She is a staff member. She is sort of the school secretary of 9th District PTA. And I know that you all have made great friends with your school secretary because they run the school. Let's recognize that. Right. I am going to stop sharing this and hopefully get up some sample minutes to show. Oh my gosh, where are my sample minutes? Please be patient. Oh, there, we've ended that. We don't want this anymore. Here's what we want. It could be I've lost everybody. Can you still hear me, Beth?
I can.
Oh, good. I can't find the Zoomy place to share this.
So down on the bottom or on the top, depending on your device, there should be a little green arrow that says share screen.
Yeah, that disappeared. Maybe it's
run your cursor over the bottom of your thing and see if your little band pops up.
Nope, no band.
Which minutes do you want to share?
I want to share the letter B sample minutes.
Let me see. I don't know what I have.
Can you come and help me? I've lost my Zoom.
Let's see.
Letter
B, the sample minutes. Let me see if I can get them.
Oh, I think I have them. I think I have the Zoomy back. I'm sorry to be stupid. These newfangled electronics are not a friend to me. There, I got now I need my document.
What is it, PowerPoint?
No, it's these. There we are. Sorry, friends. I finally found it only because I have in-house tech help. So these are teleconference minutes from 9th District PTA's meeting on May 17th. And it starts, all of that information that must be included is right there at the front. Because it was via teleconference call, we don't have a room location. So you want to note that that is what happened for this particular meeting. Also, the attendance is there. And if it's bold and like in brackets, I've added that. So in the minutes from this meeting, here are the attendees, first and last name, or attach the sign-in sheet and note that the sign-in sheet is attached. These are all members of our district board. We have a large district board. If everybody showed up, we wouldn't have a room to meet in. I'm sad that everybody doesn't show up, but I don't know where we would meet if everybody showed up. We always ask our office manager to attend these meetings in case we have assignments that we want to give to the office manager. She is a paid staff member, and we sometimes give her a bit of extra work besides her regular work. But here is the call to order. Derek Berner, President, called the meeting to order at 9:30 a.m. The secretary was absent, so Beth Bactine was appointed Secretary Pro Tem. If that happens in your association, then you'll want to do that as well. If the parliamentarian is not there, the president should appoint a parliamentarian pro tem. Other officers, you don't necessarily need to appoint a pro tem, but there could be another officer reporting. The treasurer may need to be absent for a meeting, and so somebody else is going to present the treasurer's report. So it could be, I can present a report, I just don't want to do one. So Sue King, reporting for treasurer, Beth Bactine, and then the numbers that we talked about earlier. We did not have a quorum when we started this meeting. So the president called on members to make reports. Reports aren't usually action items, but we got into things and he called on me first. So as parliamentarian, these are the things that I reported at this meeting. And then it's noted that the quorum was established at 9:35. So yay, now we can go through our other business that requires a quorum. And that includes the minutes of the previous meeting. There was one correction. We're approved as corrected. I'm hopeful that you can see that with the watermark. At any rate, we spelled someone's name wrong. So we did that correction. And then in the actual minutes were corrected. And I didn't have those, so I didn't go through the red and all of that. Here is our treasurer's report. It tells the period, the report period. So the treasurer's reporting from March 11th, 2022 through May 15th or May 13th, excuse me, 2022 begins with the balance on hand, the receipts for the period, the disbursements for the period, and the balance that's left. Complete report, including bills paid, is attached. And then Shauna made the motion to ratify the checks that were paid totaling. You want to make sure you include the total, make sure the treasurer includes the total of whatever is covered in this particular period. Checks number 12602 through 12627 for that amount. Payroll service charge, ACH is the electronic method that the district uses to submit membership that is not collected via totem, with the debits on the dates that that happened totaling $9,000. As I said, we pay our employee. Beth Bactine made motions. Beth Bactine moved to accept Logan, blah, 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 whatever the rest of her motion was. And that motion is adopted. So you can see that the disposition of each motion is noted. This motion is interesting in that the board of directors considered this motion first before it went to our district board. So it's with the board of directors concurring. Your motions most likely for association meetings will read with the executive board concurring. The hospitality committee recommends and officer moves. And they're written in the past tense. So this should be recommended, and moved. So that those are the people that have heard this motion before the association hears it. So it's not just me and my crazy idea about what we ought to be doing. Here's a second one that does the same thing. With the board of directors concurring, Beth moved to release line item 6180. We were having an event. In Beth's report, she tells us what she needs this money for. We were having a training back in July. We wanted to have hospitality for that event. So we released this line item, which is probably the hospitality budget, and that so that the treasurer can now pay the bills for whatever hospitality was purchased. And that motion was adopted. Here's another motion from Beth. And then the Budget Committee made a motion. The Budget Committee recommends, and Shauna Straw moved, to forward the provisional budget to the association meeting in June for consideration. Brian Bonner is our secretary. He showed up at this point in time. We did not capture the time that happened, but Beth is now the vice president for leadership, no longer the secretary. These are the officer reports. I don't know how we could make them any briefer. The auditor reported on convention and reminded council presidents to get audits uploaded. Vice president for family engagement and her information, including reflections information. Beth had a little bit more. Brian reported on his convention experience and reported. The president made a report. What ensued after all of that business, the council and out of council presidents continued to meet for a roundtable discussion. All sorts of topics come up during this, much like your questions. While they're all minute-based, they all go to slightly different places. These discussions go there, and all we note in our minutes is that there was one. The meeting was adjourned at 10:30 a.m. Brian Bonner, secretary, he has a blank line where he will insert the date when these minutes are approved. So when did we start this? At 9:30. It was just about an hour. And it took a 1 1/3 piece of paper. And we covered a lot of stuff. There was a lot of talking, but we try and keep our ground rules to reports are 3 minutes. If you need to talk more than 3 minutes, put it in writing and distribute it either electronically or in print. So that's what minutes look like at our district board. Yours may look similar. They may look completely different. When I was first a secretary, which was my very first elected position, we had the bound book that had beautiful handwriting in it. And then I added mine, which wasn't as beautiful, but that's how it was done in the way back. We had typewriters. Nobody had a personal computer. So those didn't come along for quite a long time. So now we have the advantages of electronics to do either electronic minutes or computer generated minutes.
So Sue, we have an additional question.
Good.
So all motions passed at the executive board meeting must be adopted again in the association meeting?
That is correct. The association is the boss of you as an executive board member. Executive board members have zero power on their own. Anything that the executive board decides to do has to be approved either by a motion or by a ratification. The difference being a motion is asking permission for a program or project. I move Sunshine PTA sponsor the school picnic. That motion, and the picnic is going to be in April. So I'm giving plenty of notice that I need to have, I wish to sponsor this event. On the other hand, if you have done something already, I think Shauna's motion is to ratify. Yes, Shauna Straw moved to ratify the following totaling because that money has already been spent. Motions to ratify are asking for forgiveness. We did this. Is that okay? Is the essence of that motion to ratify. So it's something that has already happened that you're hoping, a committee is hoping, or the executive board is hoping that it will be approved. Your association could say no. So you want to use motions to ratify very carefully, very judiciously, because if they vote no, either the executive board or the association votes no, that committee or that member may be on the docket for that bill. So be very careful with motions to ratify.
I don't see any other questions. Do any of you have questions? Please feel free to unmute yourself and ask away.
No,
No,
no.
been a lot of great questions tonight. Thank you so much. These are really great. I'm keeping all of these. I'm keeping all of these to use in other trainings.
Very good. Thank you.
Great question.
And I've got some stuff that can be added to this particular training. So
Yeah.
just clarifying information. So I appreciate you all attending. It was my goal to be finished ahead of the 8 o'clock hour. I did not realize we would finish in just an hour. So yay, you get an hour back on your evening to spend with your family, or stay in the room where you are with the door shut and tell them you're still on the call, and you can have a very quiet evening.